The loneliest songs are the ones sung by someone who doesn't even know they're singing. The first time Clara Whitmore heard the voice, she thought she was dreaming. It drifted through the winter darkness just after midnight, soft and distant, weaving between the pine trees that surrounded her little cottage on the edge of Frost Hollow. The melody was unlike anything she had ever heard. Not a folk song. Not a hymn. Not even one of the old moon ballads the elders used to whisper about during long winters. It sounded older. Sadder. As if someone was searching for something they had lost long ago. Clara sat upright in bed, holding her breath. Outside, snowflakes drifted past her window in silver spirals. The song came again. Low, gentle, hauntingly beautiful. For a moment she wondered if one of the neighboring packs was celebrating a late-night gathering, but the nearest settlement was nearly 20 miles away. Nobody should have been wandering these woods at this hour. Wrapping a wool blanket around her shoulders, Clara stepped onto the porch. The cold immediately kissed her cheeks. Frost glittered across the railings. The forest stood silent beneath the moonlight. Yet the singing continued. Then she saw him. A massive white wolf sat beneath the old cedar tree beside her cottage. His fur shimmered beneath the moon as though woven from snow and starlight. He wasn't looking at her. His silver eyes remained fixed on the sky while the strange melody flowed from somewhere deep within him. Clara froze. Every sensible instinct told her to retreat inside and lock the door. Wolves didn't behave like this, especially wolves that large. Yet nothing about the creature felt threatening. If anything, he looked lonely. The song faded. The wolf lowered his head. For several long seconds neither moved. Then, as if finally sensing her presence, the wolf turned toward the porch. Their eyes met. Clara expected him to run. Instead, he simply watched her. Calm. Quiet. Almost curious. Hello, she whispered before she could stop herself. The wolf blinked once. A gust of wind swept through the clearing. Snow danced around them. Then, without a sound, the animal rose and disappeared into the darkness between the trees. Clara stood there long after he was gone. The next night he returned. And the night after that. Soon it became a strange routine. Every evening, sometime after midnight, the white wolf appeared outside her cottage and sang beneath the cedar tree. He never came closer than a few yards. He never growled. Never showed aggression. He simply sang. Night after night. Week after week. Until Clara found herself waiting for him. Then came the storm. The worst snowfall Frost Hollow had seen all season. Wind rattled the windows. Ice coated the forest. Clara doubted even the mysterious wolf would venture out in weather like this. Yet just after midnight the song returned. Fainter than usual. Strained by the storm, Clara rushed outside. Snow whipped across the clearing. The wolf stood near the porch, his thick fur coated in white powder. For the first time he looked exhausted. The song ended abruptly. The wolf turned and disappeared into the blizzard. Something dark remained on the snow where he had stood. Clara hurried forward. Her heart pounded as she picked it up. It was a heavy black blanket, surprisingly warm despite the freezing wind. Along one corner, embroidered in silver thread, gleamed a symbol she recognized instantly. The royal crest of the Alpha King. Clara carried the blanket inside as though it were something fragile, something important. The fire in her stone hearth crackled softly while snow tapped against the windows. For a long moment she simply stood there staring at the silver crest stitched into the fabric. Every child in the Northern Territories knew that symbol. It appeared on royal decrees, tax documents, and banners that flew above the capital city more than 200 miles away. The crescent moon surrounded by silver thorns belonged to only one person, King Rowan Blackthorn. Clara swallowed hard. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps the blanket had been stolen. Perhaps a traveler had lost it years ago. Yet when she wrapped it around her shoulders, the material felt new, expensive, carefully maintained. It carried a faint scent of pine forests and cold mountain air. She had never owned anything remotely like. The mystery lingered with her all day, while gathering firewood, while feeding her chickens, while carrying water from the frozen creek behind the cottage. Again and again her thoughts returned to the white wolf and the royal blanket he had somehow left behind. By evening she had folded it neatly and placed it across the rocking chair beside the fireplace. If the wolf returned, she would give it back. At least that was what she told herself. Midnight came. Then 12:30. The cottage remained quiet. Clara sat beside the window pretending to read an old novel, while secretly watching the moonlit clearing. The cedar tree stood motionless beneath fresh snow. No silver eyes appeared between the shadows. No haunting melody drifted through the forest. Disappointment settled over her before she could stop it. She laughed softly at herself. It was ridiculous. She barely knew anything about the creature. Yet somehow his nightly visits had become part of her life. The next evening he returned. The first note reached her before she even saw him. Relief fluttered unexpectedly inside her chest. She stepped onto the porch carrying the blanket in both hands. The wolf stood beneath the cedar tree exactly where he always did. Moonlight shimmered across his white fur. His song faded as soon as he noticed her. Clara slowly held up the blanket. "I think this belongs to you." The wolf tilted his head. His silver eyes fixed on the fabric. For one strange second she thought surprise flashed across his face. Then something even stranger happened. Instead of approaching, the wolf lowered himself into the snow and rested his head on his paws. Clara frowned. "You are not taking it back?" The wolf blinked slowly. Snow drifted around him. The blanket remained in her hands. Minutes passed. Neither moved. Finally Clara sighed and sat on the porch steps. The wolf watched her. She watched him. The silence felt oddly comfortable. "Well," she said quietly, pulling the blanket around herself once more. "Thank you for lending it to me." A faint breeze stirred through the trees. The wolf closed his eyes. Then, softer than ever before, he began to sing again. This time the melody sounded different, warmer, closer. And for the first time Clara noticed something hidden inside the music. Between the notes she could almost hear her own name. More than 200 miles away, beyond frozen rivers and snow-covered valleys, King Rowan Blackthorn woke with a headache and a growing sense that something was wrong. Pale winter sunlight filtered through the tall windows of his private chambers. The fire in the marble hearth had nearly burned out. Everything appeared normal. Yet the strange feeling remained. Rowan sat up slowly and rubbed a hand across his face. He had slept for nearly 8 hours, but exhaustion still lingered in his bones. It had become a familiar problem during the past several months. Every morning he woke feeling as though he had traveled miles during the night. His personal physician blamed stress. His advisors blamed responsibility. Rowan blamed neither. He knew his own body too well. Something was happening. He simply could not explain what. A knock sounded at the door. "Enter," he called. His chief advisor, Elias Hawthorne, stepped inside carrying a stack of documents. The older man stopped almost immediately. "Your Majesty." Rowan frowned. "What?" Elias stared at him for a moment. "There are pine needles in your hair." Silence filled the room. Rowan reached upward and removed a small green needle from near his temple. Then another. His expression darkened. "Again." Elias sighed heavily. "Again." The king crossed the room toward the mirror. Sure enough, traces of forest debris clung to his dark shirt and shoulders. Not enough to alarm anyone unfamiliar with the situation, but enough to confirm what they both already knew. This was the 5th time in 3 weeks. Were the guards questioned? Rowan asked. "Every one of them." Elias set the documents down. "No one saw you leave your chambers." "That is impossible." "I agree." Rowan looked out across the capital city beyond the windows. Snow-blanketed rooftops and streets below. Thousands of people depended on him. Thousands trusted him. Yet somehow their king appeared to be wandering through forests in the middle of the night without any memory of doing so. The situation would have been amusing if it were not so troubling. "The council believes it may be a sleeping disorder," Elias said carefully. "The physicians disagree. The priests insist it could be an old moon blessing resurfacing." Rowan laughed quietly. "A blessing. Their word, not mine." The king removed his heavy coat from a nearby chair. His movements slowed. Something had caught his attention. A faint scent lingered on the fabric. Wood smoke. Lavender soap. Fresh bread. The smell was unfamiliar, yet oddly comforting. Rowan stared at the coat for several seconds. "Did anyone enter my chambers?" "No." "Are you certain?" "Completely." Rowan frowned. The scent remained. Soft. Warm. Familiar in a way that made no sense. For the briefest moment an image flashed through his mind. A small cottage surrounded by snow. Golden light spilling from a window. A woman's voice speaking gently in the darkness. Then the image vanished. Rowan blinked. "Your Majesty?" Elias asked. "Nothing." Yet it was not nothing. Because for the first time since these strange incidents had begun, Rowan felt something beyond confusion. He felt longing. As though part of him was reaching toward a place he had never seen. That evening the king attended meetings, reviewed reports, and greeted visiting dignitaries. Outwardly he remained composed. Inwardly his thoughts kept drifting back to the mysterious scent and the impossible image. Long after midnight, as snow drifted across the palace grounds and the kingdom slept beneath a blanket of silver, Rowan finally closed his eyes. And somewhere deep within the frozen wilderness, beneath the branches of an old cedar tree, a familiar melody began once more. The days began to feel shorter, not because winter was deepening, but because Clara found herself measuring time differently. Mornings were for chores. Afternoons were for gathering supplies before the next snowfall. Evenings were for the quiet hours beside the fire. But the moments she looked forward to most arrived after midnight, when the forest grew still and the familiar song drifted through the darkness. The routine settled around her like a comfortable blanket. Every night the white wolf appeared beneath the cedar tree. Every night he sang. And every night he stayed a little longer than before. Clara never questioned why. Some things felt too fragile to examine closely. The friendship had formed without words, and somehow that made it easier to trust. One evening she carried a small wooden stool onto the porch and sat wrapped in the black royal blanket while snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky. The wolf arrived earlier than usual. Instead of remaining near the tree, he crossed half the clearing before stopping. Clara noticed immediately. "That is the closest you have ever come," she said softly. The wolf blinked. His ears twitched. A strange warmth touched Clara's chest. It felt ridiculous to speak to an animal as though he could understand every word. Yet she found herself doing it more often each night. "Today I burned an entire loaf of bread," she confessed. "The chickens escaped again. And I slipped on the creek bank while carrying water." The wolf continued watching her. "You are a wonderful listener, you know that?" For a brief moment she could have sworn amusement flashed across his silver eyes. The thought made her laugh. The sound echoed gently across the snowy clearing. Something changed after that. The wolf began responding in his own quiet ways. When Clara laughed, his tail shifted slightly against the snow. When she sounded sad, he moved closer. When she spoke about difficult memories, he never looked away. And Clara had plenty of memories she rarely shared with anyone. Frost Hollow was peaceful, but it was also lonely. Her parents had passed away years earlier. Most of the nearby families had eventually moved closer to larger settlements. Clara remained because the cottage was all she had left of them. Some days she enjoyed the solitude. Other days the silence felt endless. One night she found herself speaking about things she had not said aloud in years. "Sometimes I wonder if I am becoming invisible," she admitted while staring into the moonlit forest. Weeks go by without anyone visiting. The wolf lifted his head immediately. Clara smiled faintly. "See? Even you think that sounds sad." A cold breeze swept across the clearing. Snow sparkled. Beneath the moonlight, the wolf slowly crossed the remaining distance between them. Clara held perfectly still. Her heart beat faster. The massive animal stopped beside the porch steps. Close enough now that she could see individual strands of silver-white fur moving in the wind. Close enough to hear his breathing. Neither moved. Then the wolf lowered himself onto the snow and rested his head beside the bottom step. Clara stared in surprise. "Are you serious?" The wolf closed his eyes. The gesture felt impossibly trusting. Carefully, slowly, Clara extended one hand. Her fingers brushed the thick fur behind his ear. Warm. Softer than she expected. The wolf remained perfectly still. A quiet sigh escaped him. Above them the stars shimmered across the winter sky. For the first time in years, neither the cottage nor the forest felt lonely. Winter settled deeper across the northern territories, and with it came stories. Most began as whispers exchanged beside fireplaces or over steaming mugs in crowded taverns. Travelers carried them from village to village. Hunters repeated them along frozen trails. Before long, even the capital city had begun to listen. They spoke of a strange white wolf that appeared only at night. A creature larger than any ordinary wolf, with silver eyes and a voice that could be heard drifting through the forest after midnight. Some claimed it was a spirit. Others insisted it was a guardian sent by the moon goddess. The more imaginative storytellers described it as an ancient king trapped between worlds. Each retelling grew more elaborate than the last. Clara heard the rumors when she visited the small trading post 12 miles from her cottage. She had traveled there to exchange homemade preserves for flour and lamp oil. The moment she stepped inside, she noticed a group of hunters gathered near the stove. "I am telling you, I heard it myself," one man insisted. "Sounded almost human." "Wolves do not sing," another replied. "Exactly why I left." Laughter filled the room. Clara remained quiet while selecting supplies from the shelves. Yet her attention never left the conversation. "The Royal Scouts are investigating," someone added. "Apparently. Reports have reached the capital." Clara nearly dropped the jar she was holding. The capital. Her thoughts immediately drifted toward the white wolf waiting beyond the cedar tree. She returned home before sunset with an uneasy feeling lingering in her chest. That night the sky was clear. Thousands of stars shimmered above the snowy forest. The wolf arrived shortly after midnight. Clara was already waiting on the porch wrapped in the black blanket. As soon as she saw him emerge from the trees, relief softened the worry she had carried all day. "You have become famous," she informed him. The wolf tilted his head. "People are talking about you everywhere." She smiled faintly. "You probably do not care." The wolf settled beside the porch steps as he often did now. His familiar presence made the cottage feel warmer somehow. Clara stared toward the forest. "I think they are looking for you." The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence followed. A cold breeze stirred the branches overhead. For the first time, the wolf seemed unusually attentive. His ears shifted forward. His silver eyes never left her face. "Maybe it is nothing," Clara said quickly. "Rumors are usually wrong." Yet even as she spoke, uncertainty tugged at her. The next afternoon her concern deepened. Fresh tracks appeared near the eastern edge of her property. Not wolf tracks. Horse tracks. Several sets. Clara followed them through the snow until they disappeared into the forest. Someone had been there recently. Someone searching. That evening she found herself watching the tree line repeatedly while preparing dinner. The unease refused to leave. When midnight arrived, she stepped onto the porch and immediately saw movement among the distant pines. Her breath caught. 3 riders emerged briefly between the trees before continuing deeper into the wilderness. Their dark cloaks blended with the shadows, but moonlight reflected off silver insignias pinned to their collars. Royal Scouts. Clara looked toward the cedar tree. The wolf had not arrived yet. For the first time since their strange friendship began, she hoped he would stay away. But moments later, carried gently through the frozen night, the familiar melody drifted between the trees. The next few days passed beneath a cloud of uncertainty. Clara continued her routine as usual, but the peaceful rhythm she had come to cherish no longer felt quite the same. Every set of tracks in the snow caught her attention. Every distant sound made her glance toward the forest. The Royal Scouts never approached her cottage directly, yet she occasionally spotted them in the distance, moving between the pines like silent shadows. They were searching for something. Or someone. Meanwhile, more questions surrounded the mysterious blanket draped across her rocking chair. The royal crest seemed impossible to ignore now. Clara had spent weeks pretending it was merely an odd coincidence. Yet the longer she looked at it, the less believable that explanation became. One snowy afternoon she carried the blanket to the kitchen table and carefully examined every detail. The stitching was flawless. The silver thread caught the sunlight pouring through the window. Near one corner she noticed something she had somehow missed before. Tiny initials had been embroidered beneath the crest. RB. Clara stared at them. Her pulse quickened. There was only one person in the kingdom whose name matched those letters. Rowan Blackthorne. She immediately stood and paced across the room. No, that was impossible. The king ruled from a palace hundreds of miles away. He did not wander through remote forests leaving royal belongings outside cottages. Yet every logical explanation seemed even less convincing. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Clara froze. Visitors were rare. She opened the door cautiously and found an elderly traveling merchant standing on the porch. Snow dusted his coat. "Afternoon, miss," he said kindly. "Storm coming tonight. I was hoping to rest a few minutes." Clara welcomed him inside. While he warmed himself near the fire, they exchanged small talk. Eventually the conversation drifted toward the kingdom. "The capital has been restless lately," the merchant remarked. "Strange rumors." Clara tried to sound casual. "What kind of rumors?" "About the king." She glanced up immediately. The merchant lowered his voice. "Some say His Majesty has been suffering from unusual sleep troubles." Clara felt her heart skip. Sleep troubles. That is what people are saying. He shrugged. "Waking up in strange places. Forgetting pieces of the night. Of course, palace rumors are rarely reliable." Clara forced a smile, but her thoughts were racing. Later that evening, after the merchant departed, she sat alone beside the fire staring at the blanket once more. The initials. The royal crest. The rumors about the king. The strange scent that always lingered around the fabric. Slowly, pieces that had seemed unrelated began forming a picture she was not certain she wanted to see. By midnight, snow was falling heavily again. Clara stepped onto the porch. The forest looked dreamlike beneath the storm. White flakes drifted through the darkness. Then the familiar melody reached her ears. Relief and concern arrived together. The wolf emerged from the trees moments later. As always, he moved toward the cedar tree. As always, his silver eyes found hers immediately. But tonight Clara saw him differently. Not as a mystery. Not merely as a friend. For the first time she wondered whether the impossible answer might actually be true. The wolf settled into the snow and gazed quietly toward her. Clara tightened her grip on the black blanket around her shoulders. "Who are you?" she whispered. The song faded. The wolf simply watched her. And somehow, beneath the falling snow and moonlit silence, she felt as though he was asking the exact same question. That night the storm arrived without warning. One moment the forest stood quiet beneath the moon, and the next, wind swept through Frost Hollow in long, mournful currents that rattled windows and bent the tallest pines. Clara could not shake the feeling that something was changing. She sat beside the fire with the black blanket folded across her lap, listening as snow tapped softly against the glass. Midnight came. Then another 15 minutes passed. For the first time in weeks, no song drifted from the forest. Clara rose and moved to the window. The clearing beyond the cottage lay empty. The cedar tree stood alone beneath the falling snow. Worry tightened inside her chest. She told herself it was foolish. The white wolf had survived countless winter nights before she ever met him. Yet the absence felt wrong. Another half-hour passed. Then she heard it. Not the familiar melody. Footsteps. Faint at first. Then closer. Clara opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Wind immediately tugged at her hair. Snow swirled around her boots. The clearing appeared empty until movement caught her eye near the edge of the trees. A large white shape emerged from the darkness. Relief flooded through her so quickly it almost made her laugh. The wolf was here. But something was different. His movements seemed slower, less certain. Instead of stopping beneath the cedar tree, he crossed the clearing in a wandering path, as though following something only he could sense. "Hey!" Clara called softly. "Over here." The wolf lifted his head. His silver eyes found her immediately. For one long moment neither moved. Then he continued forward. Not toward the cedar tree. Toward the cottage itself. Clara felt her pulse quicken. He had never come this close before. Step by step he approached until he stood only a few feet from the porch. Snow clung to his fur. His breathing appeared calm, yet there was a strange distant quality in his gaze. Almost dreamlike. Clara wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You look tired tonight." The wolf lowered his head slightly. Then something unexpected happened. A faint silver glow appeared beneath his fur. Clara blinked. The light vanished. Then returned again, brighter this time. The wind seemed to pause. Even the forest felt suddenly still. The wolf swayed gently where he stood. Clara stepped forward without thinking. Are you all right? The silver light spread across the clearing. Snowflakes shimmered like tiny stars. The wolf closed his eyes. What happened next felt less like witnessing an event, and more like watching a dream unfold. The white fur gradually faded into the glow. The massive shape shifted, changed, reshaped itself beneath the moonlit storm. Clara froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Seconds later the light disappeared. Silence rushed back into the clearing. Someone stood where the wolf had been. A tall man with dark hair dusted by falling snow. His features were unmistakable. Clara had seen them before on coins, official portraits, and royal proclamations. Rowan Blackthorn stood only a few feet away from her porch. Yet his eyes remained closed. His expression peaceful, as though he were still asleep. The king had never stopped singing. Only now Clara realized the song had belonged to him all along. Clara could not move. Snow drifted silently around them while the storm seemed to hold its breath. The king stood only a few feet away, motionless beneath the moonlight. For weeks she had shared her thoughts with a mysterious visitor. For weeks she had waited for a song that arrived after midnight. And now the impossible truth stood before her. Rowan Blackthorn was the wolf. The wolf was Rowan Blackthorn. Her mind struggled to catch up with what her eyes had already accepted. Your Majesty, she whispered. The words vanished into the wind. There was no response. His eyes remained closed. His expression remained peaceful. He looked nothing like the distant ruler described in stories and royal announcements. He looked tired, as though he had been carrying a burden for far too long. Carefully, Clara stepped closer. The black blanket was still wrapped around her shoulders. She hesitated only a moment before removing it and gently draping it around him. The familiar fabric settled across his shoulders as though it had finally found its way home. For the first time since she had discovered it in the snow, the blanket seemed complete. A faint smile touched her lips. I suppose this really was yours after all. The king stirred slightly. Clara froze. His breathing changed. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Rowan opened his eyes. For several seconds neither spoke. Snowflakes drifted between them. Confusion flickered across his face. Then surprise. Then something deeper. Something that looked remarkably similar to recognition. Rowan looked around the clearing. The cottage. The cedar tree. The porch. His gaze finally settled on Clara. You are real, he said quietly. Clara blinked. Of all the things she expected him to say, that had not been one of them. I am real, she replied. Rowan stared at her as though trying to solve a mystery. I thought you were a dream. Clara felt her heart skip. The king lowered his gaze briefly. Every morning I remembered fragments. A voice. A light in the forest. Someone waiting beside a cottage. He looked back at her. I never knew if any of it existed. The storm softened around them. Snow continued falling, but the wind had nearly disappeared. Clara saw genuine confusion in his eyes. There was no deception, no royal calculation, only honest bewilderment. You really did not know, she said softly. Rowan shook his head. Know what? Clara almost laughed. The situation was far too unbelievable to explain quickly. That you have been visiting this place for weeks. Silence followed. The king stared at her, then toward the cedar tree, then back again. Understanding slowly began to form. The songs, he murmured. Clara nodded. The songs. Rowan closed his eyes briefly. A quiet breath escaped him. I remember the melody. You sang it every night. His eyes widened slightly. Clara expected embarrassment. Instead she saw wonder. As though he had finally discovered the missing piece of a puzzle that had haunted him for months. The two of them stood there beneath the falling snow, neither entirely certain what came next. Yet something had changed. The mystery was no longer separating them. It was bringing them together. And for the first time since this strange journey began, Rowan no longer felt like a king searching for answers. He felt like a man who had finally found the place his heart had been trying to reach all along. Morning arrived quietly. Sunlight spilled across the snow-covered clearing outside Clara's cottage, turning the winter landscape into a sea of gold and silver. For the first time in many months, Rowan Blackthorn woke exactly where he expected to be. Not inside the palace. Not in a forgotten corner of the forest with missing memories and unanswered questions. He woke sitting beside a cottage fireplace while the scent of fresh bread drifted through the room. For several peaceful moments, neither he nor Clara spoke. Words suddenly seemed less important than they once had. The mystery that had brought them together had finally revealed itself. Later that day, Rowan shared everything the royal scholars had recently uncovered. Ancient records hidden deep within the palace archives described a rare phenomenon known as the moon call. It was not a curse. It was not an illness. It was something older. According to the records, when a destined bond was unusually strong, the wolf spirit sometimes recognized it before the human heart did. The wolf would search long before the person understood what it was seeking. Clara listened quietly while snow drifted beyond the windows. Suddenly countless pieces fell into place. The songs, the nightly visits, the strange sense of comfort they both felt. Even the feeling Rowan described each morning, as though part of him was reaching toward somewhere he had never seen. "Your wolf knew," Clara said softly. Rowan smiled. "Apparently he is much smarter than I am." She laughed, and the sound filled the cottage with warmth. Over the following days, the royal scouts finally found what they had been searching for. Not a dangerous creature. Not a mystery to solve. They found their king sitting beside a small cottage, smiling more than anyone had seen in years. News spread quickly through the kingdom. Some people were surprised. Others were delighted. Yet the story traveled far beyond the capital, because it reminded people of something they often forgot. The strongest paths in life are not always chosen by power. Sometimes they are chosen by kindness, patience, and quiet moments beneath winter stars. Weeks later, when spring finally began touching the edges of Frost Hollow, Rowan stood beside Clara beneath the old cedar tree where everything had begun. Snow still lingered in scattered patches, but birds had returned to the forest. The world felt new again. Clara held the black blanket folded carefully in her arms. "You should probably take this back," she said. Rowan looked at the blanket and then at her. "I think it found the right owner." Clara smiled. The familiar melody drifted through her memory. "I never asked why you always sang." Rowan glanced toward the sky. "I did not know at the time. And now." He stepped closer, his silver eyes warm with understanding. "Now I know my wolf was trying to find home." For a moment neither spoke. The cedar branches stirred gently overhead. Then Rowan offered his hand. Clara took it without hesitation. Somewhere beyond the trees, a breeze carried the faint echo of a song that no longer sounded lonely. It sounded complete.